It's interesting because you have this real vision for delighting and having people marvel. That seems like you have a real kind of visceral, tangible vision of how you want people to experience what you and your teams are creating.
Yeah, let me speak directly to your audience about this because I think this is really important. I think we trade away that thing you just described for all this other stuff because we're often denied it. We need something from work. But if an engineer, which I am, is truly honest about why they love engineering, it is not just the technical work. We love doing hard stuff. We're puzzle solvers, right? I once was with an engineer once, and he said, "Oh yeah, Rich," he says, "I love to do puzzles." He says, "But what I do is I turn the picture side face down. I solve the puzzle with the picture down to the table." And I looked at him and said, "Why do you do that?" And he says, "It's harder that way." So we like working on hard stuff. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't get out into the world, if it doesn't delight the people, if people don't come back to us and say, "I love that software, you guys got to work on that. That must have been so cool." That's what really drives us, is the delight we create in other people who don't know what we know. And I just want to remind your audience that that's why we got into this profession in the first place. We didn't get into it just because it was hard. We didn't get into it just because we had to be smart. I mean, those are important. But at the end of the day, we do it to serve other people.
Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of exponential technologies, business innovation, entrepreneurship, thought leadership, enterprise IT security, neuroscience, philosophy, personal development, and more. Welcome to the show. Hello, I'm Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. I hope you liked the introduction. That was one of my favorite introductions. It sort of sets the tone for this conversation. I feel like I'm on a flip and roll with my guests recently. I'll be honest with you. I'm floored and impressed with the wisdom and talent and inspiration that I'm receiving personally from them. As I look at my notes with Rich Sheridan today, I want to have him back immediately because there's just questions that I want to keep asking him. But let's get into who Rich Sheridan is. He got started as a kid programmer in 1971. He's the author of this wildly popular book called Joy, Inc. He's also a Michigan graduate as a BS in computer science and a master's in computer engineering. He's never shied away from challenges, opportunities, nor the limelight. While his focus has always been around technology, his passion is actually process, teamwork, culture, and organizational design, with one inordinately popular goal: the business value of joy. He's an avid reader and historian, and his software design and development team at Menlo Innovations didn't invent a new culture, but copied an old one, Thomas Edison's Menlo Park, New Jersey lab. And Henry Ford's recreation of Menlo Park lab in Greenfield Village was a childhood inspiration of his. Some call it agile, some call it lean, but Rich and his team call it joyful, and it produces results, business and otherwise. 6 Inc. magazine revenue growth awards, invites to the White House, speaking engagements around the nation, numerous articles and culture awards, and so much interest that his company is doing 1 tour a day of the Menlo software factory. And he just, I think this even needs to be updated because he says he's walked about 4,000 people through his company this year. I mean, that's how popular his message is. What you're going to get from being a fly on the wall, I love that word, fly on the wall, my discussion with Rich, is an innovative perspective on people, culture, and design from one of the top, what I believe he's one of the top organizational leaders and business builders in the U.S. today. I'm fascinated with people who have enormous courage, heart, and vulnerability that it takes to actually do things differently and go against the normal, quote unquote, normal grain. And in Rich's case, it's radically different. I don't care whether you are a business IT leader employed by a company or an entrepreneur. Rich and I cover both because he's had massive success with both. While listening, you will learn and take away knowledge of how to handle the chaos of software development, with process and culture, the process of installing a culture of delight in your teams, his version of instilling accountability and service, the concepts of team flow, and you also learn one simple phrase to disarm every naysayer ever again. So we talk about, when you bring back good ideas and they just get blown up by people around you, he has one simple phrase to disarm that. This discussion is a master's class. I felt like he was speaking to me and how to think about my own company and my own teams within my company. I trust his message will equally ring true for you. Make sure to check out the show notes page at redzonetech.net/podcast, where you can connect with him further via Twitter. I'd also like to encourage you to subscribe to my weekly Exponential Business IT newsletter, which you can subscribe directly to via your phone app by pressing the show logo image or via the show notes page at redzonetech.net/podcasts. Some of the curated content topics covered this week that my team and I put together for you are concepts of radical transparency, plus elimination of spin to make CEOs happy, anticipation, how to build anticipation into your organization to anticipate disruptive technologies, know the disruptors in your vertical market, links to 160 startups that might disrupt you. We cover also some leadership skills review from Harvard Business Review and enterprise IT security articles for IT security governance in the cloud and architecture and design. We also cover neuroscience of leadership, the gratitude science, and the human brain. And also I spoke recently at an event and I streamed it live on Facebook. And we also captured video clips on virtual reality education from 3 startups that I think have very, very practical ideas for CIOs. So that covers that. And I think that's everything I have for you. And as always, I appreciate you for listening and for your time. And now let's get into my fun and engaging interview with Rich Sheridan.
So, Rich, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, your book begins with this interesting foreword by Kerry Patterson. And
actually, Kerry is a guy, just to be
okay.
clear. Yep, he's one of the founders of Vital Smarts. But yeah, it's one of those androgynous names for sure.
Oh, excellent. I just put that together now because you spoke at a Vital Smarts. I think I watched on YouTube. Great. That makes a lot of sense. But what was really interesting about one of his comments was, Rich, this is in quotes by him, Rich, your book needs to have one message. I guess you were at the time trying to decide on the title of the book. So it's interesting. If you're going to call the book Joy, Inc., it can't be a book that says you can create whatever corporate culture you want, and here's how, because everyone promises to help you change your culture. I personally want the joy you allude to in the title and saw firsthand. And then he proceeds on to say, your voice is a voice of hope, followed by the voice of practical wisdom. For the love of Mike, don't stop short of telling people to seek a culture of joy. You're being far too modest by hinting they can choose whatever. Someone needs to stand up for joy. Please consider it your calling. Don't equivocate your way into another book on culture change. Anything that steps off the stance of joy is the purpose, and here's how to get it. Lessens your message and raises doubt in the reader and throws the title into question. I just love that. Maybe we can use that as a launching point.
You bet. Absolutely. Kerry is a good friend. When I was writing the book, I had this brief exchange with him, and he poked me hard in a way I really needed to be poked. Because I will tell you, when you write a business book and it has the words joy and love on the cover, that's kind of vulnerable, right? I didn't know how the world would receive the message. I was probably a little afraid that it wouldn't be taken seriously. And quite frankly, the opposite has happened.
So I'd love to start at the beginning, but I'd like to cover this from both the CEO, kind of owner, operator point of view, but then also from some of the questions are going to be framed around the business information leader, business IT leader in an organization. Where do you develop this courage when you are vulnerable? Where is the genesis of the courage to be vulnerable for you?
I fell in love with this profession when I was just a little kid. I took a computer science class at my high school. First time they ever offered it in 1971. And quite frankly, I was hooked. And I knew what I wanted to do the rest of my days. And I actually got a job programming before I could drive. And I thought, this is awesome. This was a calling for me. I eventually came up to the University of Michigan, got a couple of degrees in computer science and computer engineering. And quite frankly, I thought I had the world by the tail. And the way the world measures success, I did. The trouble was I very quickly fell out of love with the profession that I was inside of. It was betraying me. I was taking the longest possible drives to work at a certain point because I was living in a land of chaos or bureaucracy or some mixture of the two. And there was no joy in my profession in my mid-30s. And quite frankly, I will tell you, I was scared. I didn't know what I was going to do the rest of my days. I was 35 years old. I'm looking ahead and I'm like, I know I can't do this for the next 30 years. And so I was a bit backed into a corner. Sheridan is an Irish name, and there's a family coat of arms. Many of the Irish have that. And there's a Latin phrase underneath it that translated says, the stag at bay becomes a lion. And I was that stag. You know, the idea is a cornered rat fights. You know, you backed me into a corner, and I fought my way out. So the courage for me was born out of fear. And it's interesting, I just saw a quote the other day that was just, I thought was awesome. And it said that the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity.
Oh.
I thought I think that's where the courage came from for me, was I realized if I was going to keep doing this profession for the next 30 years, I couldn't do it the same. I had to be different. I had to change. And the world around me had to change. And that really was kind of a crystallizing moment for me. It still took me another 10 years from kind of that personal conviction, but my journey out led me to authors and books, but not books on technology, because quite frankly, writing software was trivial compared to organizing human teams. And so that was the part I was fascinated with, was we needed a different kind of organizational structure, a different kind of organizational design. So the books I was drawn to were by organizational design thinkers. Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, Peter Drucker's books on management, Tom Peters' book, In Search of Excellence. All these books were informing there was a better way of doing things that was customary. They didn't necessarily tell you how to get there, but they at least gave me the picture of a shining city on the hill, and I wanted to get there.
Now, when you had this vision, that this crucible moment, you were an employee at that time, correct? You were.
Yes, I was. Yep. I was kind of in the middle of an organization. I was kind of a mid-level manager leading a team, and I was on my way. I mean, in the next few years, I would go from that mid-level manager to VP of R&D for what would become one of the highest flying companies based on stock growth in Michigan. We were named the #1 public company in Michigan in 1999 based on stock growth. It was internet bubble times, and we were right in the heart of it. It wasn't real, but it was heady. So, I was inside this tired old public company, and I was getting promoted. I was getting rewarded. I was being honored in so many different ways. I was being given office and authority and privilege and benefits and stock options. The world was telling me I was successful. I just knew I wasn't. And quite frankly, it was the distance between what the world thought I was doing and what I knew I was doing, that delta between those two data points, that was driving me insane. Because quite frankly, I felt like I was living a lie.
So maybe just for our listeners, we can just give them some context. So you've literally been, from the beginning in the early 70s, a part of the internet, and you were one of the first groups of people right on the internet early on, correct?
Yeah, I mean, back in 1971, we were just dialing up into computers that were in faraway places, doing programming over 110 baud dial-up modems, with phones that would cradle into suction cups and hear all those screechy tones that we got used to when we all learned how to use AOL. We were doing that back in the early 70s. And, I was probably doing the exact same kind of thing in 1971 that Bill Gates was doing where he lived. And there were only a few high schools in the nation, quite frankly, 3 that I was aware of at the time that were teaching computer science in high school in 1971.
And so when you graduated from college, you had this double major. And did you always know early on, I think it was engineering and computer science, correct?
Yep.
And then when you came out, did you know that you wanted to found your own company at some point?
I think I knew that by the time I was 14 years old. I was drawing logos for an imagined future company as early as 14. For some reason, I knew in my heart I would start my own company one day. I, quite frankly, am astounded it took me till I was 43 years old to do it.
What's interesting to me, Rich, is that I'm drawn to your message as an owner and as someone who really is responsible for culture and the impact your book has had on myself. But then as I read the book, though, there's really interesting stories that impact the CIO. And one of them was on accountability. And so are you finding that you're pulling equally from the owner-operator side of the fence and then also within organizations themselves?
Oh, yes. I think I spend far more time inside the organizations, particularly the large ones. As I know we bring visitors to see our company. We had almost 4,000 visitors come from all over the world last year alone. We do 1 to 3 tours a day of Menlo now. And most of the people who come are coming from those large organizations, and they're looking for something. They're looking for those lessons around what it takes to build an intentionally joyful culture. And so we get the C-levels, we get the mid-level managers, we get the frontline workers, and they're all kind of looking for the same thing. They want it. Whatever it is, whatever they think it is when they walk in the room, but they can feel it here. And they want it, and they're trying to figure out what it is and how they get to it, and they know they can't have exactly what we're having. That's not the point. I don't think everybody should make their organization look like mine. But on the other hand, they want to get started. They want to get started on a journey, and they're trying to figure out how to do that.
Okay, so I want to get into the joy piece and that word joy in a second, but to come out with something that's so profoundly the opposite of, so to have the book Joy, you'd have to have an experience of profoundly the opposite. And maybe you can paint for the listeners who are primarily business and information technology leaders of all types and titles, what is the opposite of Joy Inc. That, and then we can get into what it means to have a company that's based on the principles that you said in the book.
Sure. Yeah, I think the easiest, if I was to write the antithesis book, it would be called Fear Inc. Right? And, I was managed with fear in my early career. I learned to manage with fear, creating artificial fear, trying to get people motivated by making them afraid. And that was a good portion of my early career. And then there was the fear that was generated just by the processes in the environment we were living in. The world I was living in, the one I wanted to escape, was one of chaos at one end. And chaos in the software industry is easy to imagine. I tell the story of Knight Capital Group, where this tired programmer makes a pretty straightforward error on a server update. Knight Capital Group trades $7 billion worth of securities they weren't supposed to in 45 minutes, costing Knight Capital Group $400 million. I mean, that's chaos in our industry. Our industry regularly fails. You barely can get by the first page of the Wall Street Journal and not read about some massive IT failure, right? Just look at the airlines, Southwest Airlines and Delta Airlines and United Airlines, canceling thousands of flights, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers and losing hundreds of millions of dollars in a short period of time. Not because their pilots were on strike, not because their equipment wasn't working, not because there was some kind of terrorist threat, because their software wasn't working right. So chaos in the software industry is pretty easy to imagine. I will tell you that my life felt like our processes were the equivalent of flicking lit cigarette butts everywhere while carrying sloshing gas cans. And we wondered why there were fires everywhere. It's because we were setting most of them. And then, usually the response when something really bad happens is bureaucracy, right? It's a big, thick binder filled with stage gates and committees and standing meetings and approvals and sign-offs. And yet you still have to get stuff done, so people start working around the system. They placate the system. Now you're operating in chaos and bureaucracy simultaneously. That was the life I was living in.
So the chaos is this living hell you were in, and I'm assuming that you were using some of the traditional models at that point, like SDLC and
Yep.
waterfall techniques for software development. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's funny. I hear people describe that, and I probably would describe that. But let's be honest. I mean, most of that stuff isn't really designed. It just sort of evolved evolves, if it evolves at all. It's more just that meeting culture where we're gonna have Monday morning status meetings. We're gonna have we're gonna assign people work 25% on this and 50% on that. But there's really at the end of the day, there's no real structure to it. We might have the forms, we might have the documents, we might have the committees and the reviews and all that sort of thing. But quite frankly, if you're honest with yourself and your organization, as I had to eventually be, you find out that most of the real work gets done by working around whatever system you have in place.
Sure.
I will often say that, if you want to test a process, test it under fire. Because if you got a process that's in place and it's cooking along and you're like, yeah, process works great. Now all of a sudden something happens. Some heightened priority arrives. You tell me, do people flee towards the process or do they flee away from it? Does the company come together and say, you know what? We don't have time for all that process stuff. We just got to go get stuff done. That's your process. That's where the chaos is spread from. If you have a good process, if you have a good, my favorite saying is that culture without process produces chaos, but process without culture produces bureaucracy. You have to have a culture and a process that feeds that culture, and the way it's working is when times gets tough, you flee towards your process, not away from it.
You had a story in the book that was super interesting with the CEO of a company came in and it was talking to you. Maybe you can remember the story from the book. Sometimes I ask that question and I don't want to put you on the spot with it, but just to prime you, it was the CEO came in and said, and then you had the idea, let's test something within the software. And maybe,
well, it wasn't. Yeah. No, what happened was one of our fondest customers and one of our largest customers came in to visit. CEO, her name is Jen Baird, really good friend of mine. And I said, hey, Jen, let's just have some fun. Let's test our process. Because we have a very strong process. It's very rigorous, but it's simple. And so I wanted to see how it worked. Well, we have this habit here. We will not work on anything unless it's first handwritten on an index card, estimated in hours, planned in our planning game, which is a weekly event, and then put up on a wallboard display under specific people's names so they know it's their job to work on it. And so I went up to Keely and Ted, who were paired together, and Jen was with me, and they were working on Jen's project. She's the one paying us to do the work. So we got two CEOs, effectively their boss, Keely and Ted. I'm the CEO of the company they work for, and then our customers right there with me, who has all the authority that a CEO would have, right? So we walk up, and I say, hey, guys, I was just talking with Jen. I want to add this new feature to the project, and we'd like you to stop what you're working on, and could you hop on this feature? And they looked up at me, and they said, sure, let's write a story card for it. Let's get it estimated. We'll see if we can fit it in the plan. And I said, guys, we don't have time for that. I said, Jen's right here. She looked at me and says, yep, let's get moving on it. And they're like, no, it's really simple. We'll just write the card. We'll get it estimated. You give it to Lisa. You get it on our board. We could not get them to divert from the structure that produces a great deal of safety for them. They were very pleasant. They weren't saying no. They were sort of doing the improv theater. Yes, and what we're going to do is we're going to write a story card. We're going to estimate it. We can do that right now. In 5 minutes, Rich, you have it up on that wallboard display, but here's the important implication of what Keely and Ted were saying. And when you put it up on the wallboard display, Rich, something's going to come off. You're making a trade here. You're inserting this into our work stream, so something else of lower priority is going to fall off the list. And that right there is a crucible moment, or a vital behavior, as Vital Smarts like to talk about. Like, what do you do when that happens in your process? Because I will tell you, my old managerial life was I'd present a plan, and not 2 minutes out of the room when I was a VP, somebody'd say, hey, great plan, Rich, awesome job, but just one more thing. And of course, just one more thing is the beginning of the entire plan just crumbling to bits. Because one more thing, 5 times that day, 10 times the next, 20 times next week, and suddenly I come back to the next quarterly meeting and I'm presenting what I actually got done versus the plan, and there the twain shall meet. And then I get the crap beat out of me every 3 months because I wasn't working on the plan.
So you had this hell experience before you started Menlo, and then you read these 2 books, or maybe one wasn't a book, one was a...
Yeah, so I read the book by Kent Beck on something called extreme programming. and that was around 1999, 2000 time period when the book came out. And I will tell you, it spoke to me. I read that book, and I'm like, this guy has lived my life, and he's got this awesome framework to think about how to get out of the chaos world. And it was very understandable to me because Kent's experiences and mine were quite parallel to one another. I saw what Kent was describing. I'm like, yeah, that was my life. And what Kent said was, it's kind of simple in his book. What he said was, look back in your career like I did and think about the times you were most effective, because it wasn't chaos every minute of every day. You know, you'd go insane if it was. He says, but think when you were the most effective. And, you know, so he says, for me, he says, when I worked really closely on something important with another person, when there was an emergency or there was something we had to deliver, I went and grabbed Bill and I said, hey, Bill, sit here with me. I need you to watch what I'm doing, because if I make a mistake, it could be catastrophe tomorrow. So please, you know, question me on everything I'm doing. And he says, if that worked during the emergency, why might not it work all the time? And that's what pair programming was born out of. You know, and Ken said, we worked on little projects that went better than we worked on big projects. He says, why don't we do big projects and break them down into smaller ones? And that's where story card-driven development came from. And then I saw a video on an industrial design firm in California called IDEO. Nightline had done an episode on them called The Deep Dive. And they just watched them redesign the shopping cart. Fictitious project. But they watched the process of design. And that was the other part that was disturbing to me. It wasn't just the chaos. It wasn't just the technical faults of the systems. It was that when we finally delivered stuff to the world, the users hated it or didn't need it or didn't meet a business need. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to delight people. I wanted people to marvel at the work of my heart, my hands, and my mind. And they weren't, and they were frustrated. And I thought there's got to be a better way around design. And IDEO really had a great, you know, they planted a great mental image in my head, which eventually we called high-tech anthropology. Go out into the world and study people in their native environment. Learn their workflow, their vocabulary, their habits, their goals as human beings, and inject what you learn about them into the design process so that by the time you deliver the software, that hopefully because of the Kent Beck approach, it works incredibly well, and it does, that it will be actually something useful and usable by the people who are intended to use it, not just the engineers who designed it.
It's interesting because you have this real vision for delighting and having people marvel. That seems like you have a real kind of visceral, tangible vision of how you want people to experience what you and your teams are creating.
Yeah, let me speak directly to your audience about this, because I think this is really important. I think we trade away that thing you just described for all this other stuff because we're often denied it. We need something from work. But if an engineer, which I am, is truly honest about why they love engineering, it is not just the technical work. We love doing hard stuff. We're puzzle solvers, right? I once was with an engineer once, and he said, oh, yeah, Rich, he says, I love to do puzzles. He says, but what I do is I turn the picture side face down. I solve the puzzle with the picture down to the table. And I looked at him and said, why do you do that? And he says, it's harder that way. So we like working on hard stuff. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't get out into the world, if it doesn't delight the people, if people don't come back to us and say, I love that software, you guys got to work on that. That must have been so cool. That's what really drives us, is the delight we create in other people who don't know what we know. And I just want to remind your audience that that's why we got into this profession in the first place. We didn't get into it just because it was hard. We didn't get into it just because we had to be smart. I mean, those are important. But at the end of the day, we do it to serve other people. And we serve people in a way that delights, we get joy.
Yeah, I think that's a huge message. And it just reminds me, there's a woman, Karen Sorensen, and she used to be the CIO of Johnson & Johnson. I think I've mentioned this story on my show before, but she was the CIO of all the CIOs. There was 100 CIOs of 100 sub-companies to Johnson & Johnson. So she was the CIO of the CIOs. And she told me once, she says, we make bandages for people, burn victims. And she would envision the impact of her work all the way down to the care of the patient and the systems and the processes and the output that was actually soothing and taking care of that particular, and that always has really struck me. And she subsequently left there and gone on to massive success elsewhere, but maybe there's a clue there in what you're just articulating of really tapping into the why we're doing what we're doing.
You bet. And here's the interesting thing, right? And again, I'm just sort of picturing your audience and what they need to be thinking about. I often talk to people about thinking hard about who they serve. Now, that is a different equation for most people in business from who are your customers. Because in fact, like at Menlo, like that Jen Baird was our customer for a flow cytometer. Okay, and that's a scientific instrument that helps cancer researchers, or now it's moved into an FDA medical device territory where it is now used to monitor the treatment of people with AIDS and cancer and lymphomas and leukemias. So I could think about serving Jen because she's the one writing checks to us. But our team, first and foremost, thinks about the cancer researcher first. Now, that's somebody who will never meet us. We will probably, other than a few sample people in that category so we can do the high-tech anthropology piece, but the people, they don't even buy the product from Jen's company. So they don't buy our services. They don't even buy Jen's product because somebody purchasing at the University of Michigan bought this product and put it on a lab researcher's desk. But the people we think of first are the people that are going to touch our work every single day. People we will never meet. People will never write us a check. That's who we serve. Use a more tangible example. Let's say you're a life insurance company. If I asked you, who do you serve? You say, well, the policyholders. And my answer is not really. Because at the point, if I buy a life insurance policy from, some big life insurance company, the moment I get the greatest value out of the product I bought, I'm no longer here.
Absolutely.
And, somebody's going to pick up that phone who doesn't know who that life insurance company is. They don't know my agent. They've never built a relationship. But in that moment, when you answer that phone call, you better deliver a 55-gallon drum full of compassion. You better be incredibly organized with crisp answers to a person whose mind is swimming, having just lost someone who's near and dear to them. And that person is not your customer.
It's very, very interesting, this conversation, because the audience really, with technology and with business now, is more and more being placed on the shoulders of the business IT leader, the CTO, the CIO, whoever that may be. And at the same time, they're taking care of maybe 1,000 users who are using the computing equipment. And recently, a couple clients of ours have lost their jobs indirectly because they weren't taking care and serving effectively the 1,000 users. However, what we're also talking about, what we just had a conversation on, is externally focusing, the CIO being externally focused, which is really the strategic focus that a lot of CIOs are having to grow into now, which, whether they like it or not, they're having to move into that direction, thinking outside of where they're going to serve and who they're serving. How would you counsel someone in balancing both from our conversation?
So, and this probably I'm expressing my deep-founded beliefs, not only about why do we go to work every day, as human beings, why are we driven to work, and then how do we lead? So, I'll share with you my personal beliefs about this. So the reason when I talk about joy, I talk about service to others, and it's this externally focused attention on producing delight in the world, is that I believe that we, as human beings, are fundamentally wired to work on something that's bigger than ourselves. And that purpose-driven component is what brings us to work every day engaged, and most people don't. So this is a fundamental act of leadership to remind everybody who's on your team, why are we here? What do we believe about ourselves? Who do we serve? And what do we want to do for them? Because we can put up with a lot. We can, we're in the windowless basement of a parking structure in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. I mean, people are like, wow, your team seems so happy and there's no sunlight here. And I'm like, yeah, because the focus of attention is on who we serve. And you can put up with a lot in that environment. I want to distinguish, I do in the book, between joy and happiness. Because we're not happy every minute of every day. That's not the point. we are happy. I mean, there's definitely laughter in the room. There's palpable human energy. That's a fundamental part of the team. But with that external focus, being reminded about it every single day, now we can start to ask ourselves about the inside stuff. Why do we do what we do? Why are we having this meeting? Why do we have this form? Why do we have this process and procedure? Why are we doing things the way we do them? And if the answer isn't related to who do we serve, then maybe we should stop doing it. Maybe we should change. When people come through here on a tour, I tell them the joy story. I tell them why we exist, what we believe, and then I tell them, I'm going to take you on a tour and show you how we do what we do. And I can tell you, you can stop me at any point and say, Rich, that thing right there, that thing you do, what does that have to do with that joy you're describing? And I can draw a short, straight line back to the people we serve. And if I can't, we don't do it. We jettison it. And this is just really fundamentally important for leaders to think about. How do we influence our teams? Because now we have an opportunity as leaders to do something that every company on the planet is looking for right now. How do we capture that 60 to 70 to 80% of our people's energy where they're disengaged at work? Because that number is so big, so massive, and it relates to the people who already work for us, who are already carrying a paycheck out the door every day. We don't have to go hire them. We don't have to go find them. They're right around us every day. And as leaders, if we can reach into that percentage, holy cow, can we make a difference in our teams, in our industries, and in the world.
So you're tapping that 60 to 70% of really what you think unharnessed energy, or basically potentially capped by fear. It seems like fear is a big piece of this, or it's like you've decoupled some of the institutional norms that people have, and you've let the fire out of the bottle, let the genie out of the bottle, or I'm not sure what the right analogy
I
would be.
will say what I think we've managed to do, and it's delightful for me because I think we all have good memories about that time in our lives when we were in kindergarten. We have captured a kindergarten spirit and energy here. We talk about the fact that when we look for people, we look for good kindergarten skills. Do you play well with others? This is a one-room schoolhouse for innovation, and we have captured that. And I'd be honest with you, I mean, this is a very selfish journey for me at the outset because I wanted to create the environment I wanted to come to every day. And I can tell you for the last 17 years, the 2 years at Interface Systems where I was a VP of R&D and now the 15 years at Menlo, the joy is back for me. Often the last thought just before my head hits the pillow is I can't wait to get up and go back to work the next day.
Well, it's interesting because I want to make sure people are clear that you actually implemented this before you founded Menlo. And I think that's important because for people to say, oh, I can't do this because I don't have the right culture or the right whatever. And maybe you can answer, or you're about to jump on what I'm saying, and I want you to, and I just want you to explain that micro experiment in this, having the courage to experiment on something, and maybe you can build on that.
Yeah, you bet. It is an important part of the story because I can tell you a lot of people come to Menlo, they see it, and they're like, oh, Rich, you're so lucky. You got to start from scratch. You got to build your culture from scratch. And I look at them and I say, oh, you didn't hear me describe the earlier part of my story where over a 2-year period as a VP, I wasn't even a CEO. I was a VP of R&D, which is, I will tell you, even in a technical firm, it's often low man on the totem pole behind sales and marketing and customer service and administration and executive team. You're kind of the lead programmer in some ways when you're a VP of R&D. And, often the smartest guy in the room kind of thing, but smart about one particular thing, not about all the other stuff that runs the business. And so I, from that perch, transformed that company over a 2-year period. And Bob Nero, who was the CEO, I just saw him the other day, will credit me for having changed that firm in dramatic ways that ultimately led to a 10x valuation increase when they sold the company. And so it is possible to do this in any environment. You don't have to start a company from scratch. And I would encourage your listeners, while I have enjoyed my entrepreneurial journey, there's nothing easy about it. Yes, starting a business from scratch, you can build a culture from scratch. That's great, but boy, you gotta find customers, you gotta pay the bills, you gotta make payroll, all the kind of stuff you gotta do for business. But I did it inside that tired old public company, and quite frankly, there was resistance everywhere. I mean, the first time I suggested this kind of approach to my technical team, they wouldn't even make eye contact with me. They just went dead silent. They wanted me to to move on to the next subject in the conversation. And I said, no, guys, this is important to me. Here's what I'm thinking of doing. And I was describing a bit of the Kent Beck world and the ideal world. And I said, this is where I want to go. And finally, one of the guys on my team raises his hand. He says, Rich, blood, mayhem, murder. Don't do it. Don't pull me out of my office. Don't put me out in a big open environment. Don't make me share a computer with another human being. And for God's sakes, don't make me share my code. But what's interesting is that same meeting, a couple of the other guys who didn't say anything came up to me afterwards. And they said, we want to try this. We want to run the experiment. And so two guys, Claire and Bob, paired, using the Kent Beckian methods of story cards and iterative and incremental approach and pairing all day long. And 3 weeks into that experiment, one of the two guys, Claire, caught me in the parking lot. And this was a guy who weeks before had sat down with me and said he was leaving. He was putting his resume together. Would I be a reference for him? He was so despondent, like I was, and he wanted to get out. He wanted to go work somewhere else. He thought that would be a solution. Now, this guy who was about to quit on me, but decided to run this experiment, stops me in the parking lot and he says, Rich, are you still going to pay me to work here? And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, well, this is so much fun and I'm getting so much done and I feel so good about it. I'm not sure you should pay me anymore. It doesn't feel right. And he was kind of serious. I mean, not like dead serious. I wasn't going to usher him down and sign for the volunteer program down in HR or anything. But think about that. Blood, mayhem, murder at one end.
Yeah.
I will work for you for free at the other end. I was not getting lukewarm responses, and I will suggest to your audience that when you're making an important change, the energy is not going to come from the middle. It's going to come from the edges. Pay attention to both. Now, 6 months in, it was rocking and rolling. I mean, really transformational. One of my older programmers came to me, David was his name, and he said, Rich, I don't get it. He says, you had everything, and you put it all on the line for this experiment that you did not know would succeed. Because there's no way you knew it would go this well when you started. Why were you willing to take this risk? Where did that courage come from? Sort of like your question earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
And I looked at him, I said, David, it was easy. And he goes, really? How's that possible? He says, you had title, you had authority, you had paycheck, you had stock options. He says, you put it all on the line. You bet this entire thing on 33 black. Why? I said, you don't understand, David. That stuff wasn't at risk for me. What was at risk for me was my flame was going out. I'm only 35 years old, David. That flame goes out. I never get it back. I said, what was at risk was me. What I decided was that the risk of change was far less than the risk of staying the same. The risk of staying the same was far greater than the risk of change. And once I made that decision in my head, I started racing towards change because I wasn't running towards risk. I was running away from risk because what was at risk was me. I didn't know what I was going to do the rest of my days. This is what I had trained for. I had a wife and 3 children, a house, 2 cars. I was scared. And I just decided at that point, I got to change.
Well, that's why I asked the question earlier. I'm so glad you brought that quote, too, because that was the quote I was going to ask you about, that it's another crucible moment, and I'm as an employee, because I often hear that from my good friends that are CIOs, and there's usually, because there's a different level of maturity in each organization, is where this metaphor, I'm using the CIO, CTO, CISO, I'm using that metaphorical IT leader. Mm-hmm. There's not culturally, every company has a different perspective of the value and role of the CIO. But what you're saying is you had an internal compass first that reached a boiling point, of which then you used to launch the change within the organization.
Yeah, and it was a dramatic moment for me where I said, no, and this is back to that Sheridan family coat of arms, beware the stag at bay becomes a lion. I was cornered. I was cornered in my career, and I just fought my way out.
And then you also had you went down, and one of the chapters is about accountability. And I think this is one of the interesting, because now as an owner, people have to there's accountability for revenue and profits and such for sustainability in your company. But then as a CIO, you had the story of being called to this insurance company. And if you could share that story, and maybe then we can weave it through to company. I'm super curious of how you could take the software code world and your communication with some of the business folks, but then you also have this need for accountability within your own organization for sustainability. And maybe we can start with the CIO of the insurance company and just explain that story first.
Yeah, so I get invited into a lot of companies now to carry this message in, and we actually, one of the things we decided as Menlo from day one is we think we discovered something important, and we literally decided to share it with the world, that nothing we do here we keep trade secret. So we share all of our approaches, our practices, our methods. People come here by the thousands. They take pictures. They learn from us. Some people spend 2 hours. Some people spend 5 days. Everybody says the same thing, no matter how long they're here. I wish we had more time. This rabbit hole goes very deep here at Menlo. And so I got invited to this company down in Atlanta, and I was describing Menlo as an all-day class. I'm with the CEO and the CIO and the VP of marketing and head of HR and the technical team. I mean, I had them all there. And a fairly significant brand. Everybody would know the brand. And so there I am. I'm talking to this team, and somewhere along the way, somebody asked me about accountability around estimates. So we have this practice here where we estimate our work every single day, right? And we know, each of these story cards is estimated in hours. We put the hours up on the wallboard display and so on. So it's kind of a fundamental sort of building block component of all the planning process, all the reporting and so on and everything. All the work process here is the atomic element of Menlo is this estimated story card in hours. And so somebody asked me, well, how do you hold people accountable? And I thought, oh boy, this is going to be an interesting discussion because it's not going to go the direction they're thinking it is, right? And there's a lot of paradox inside of Menlo. And I said, well, let me tell you how this works here. I said, because I think accountability is one of the most dangerous words in management. And the reason I think that is this. The way I see it used, it's always a fear-based word. Bill, I need you to be accountable for this. As soon as I say that, right, I'm generating fear right off the bat. And what I told this group was, I said, well, let me tell you how accountability works at Menlo. I said, number one is my accountability as a CEO, co-founder of the company, visionary leader, the accountability I first deliver to my team. And, of course, they're all looking at me like, oh, no, that's not how accountability works, Rich. Leaders ask for accountability. They don't deliver it. I'm like, no, just hang on a second here. Because this is a system, remember. So in order, in my view, for a system to work, there has to be sort of inputs and outputs, right? So my input into the system is my accountability to my team. And here's what I tell them. I said, guys, you will never, ever be punished here or cajoled or intimidated for missing an estimate. And, of course, now I'm looking at all the rest in the crowd, and they're all like, well, this isn't going how we had hoped, right? And I said, you won't be pushed to lower your estimates. You won't be intimidated when you blow one. It's just what happens. And I said, now I can ask for something in return. As soon as you know, as soon as you think, you're on you're on a 16-hour card, and suddenly you're 4 hours in, you think it's going to take 32 hours, just raise your hand. Tell a project manager, say, hey, Lisa, it looks like we thought it was 16. It looks like it's 32. We had to actually teach our project managers, this is one of these vital behaviors, to smile. Say, thank you for sharing that information. Now let's talk about what you've learned, right? And if we need be, we might have to even call the customer and say, hey, guys, we're 4 hours into this card. We thought it was going to take 16. Looks like it's going to take 32. What would you like us to do? So at this point, I can see it in their eyes. Like, I've lost them all. They're like, this is not going where I thought it was going to go. And finally, there's one guy, a VP of marketing, stands up and he thrusts his finger out. And I hope your audience can handle the language because I'm just quoting. He says, this is bullshit. And the whole room goes silent because he kind of yelled it out. He was standing and he was pointing his finger at me. And he says, let me tell you how accountability works at our company. He says, you tell me you're going to do something by Friday. You're going to be done or else. I said, or else what? He says, or else you're staying a weekend. I don't care if it's your kid's birthday. I don't care if it's Christmas morning. You're going to be here. I said, oh, interesting. He says, that's the way accountability works here. Now, he was pretty fired up. I was pretty calm. Of course, I was going to be gone the next day, so what did I care? They had to live with him, right? But I looked at him and I said, Joe, let's say I go back to Menlo tomorrow and I institute your version of accountability. What do you think might happen? And boy, oh boy, I'll tell you, it was literally like I watched every cell in his body change from head to toe as he contemplated my question. And what he said next was stunning. He looks at me and says, well, let me tell you what would happen, Rich. People would start to lie to you about being done. They'd cut quality corners. They'd say they're done when they're not. They'd deliver substandard work to the market. Your customers would begin to notice, and they'd start to call in and complain, and you'd start to lose some customers to your competitors because their products worked better than yours did. He says you start to lose market share, and then you went from number 1 in the business to number 3 in the business almost overnight. He says what would happen, Rich, is exactly what has happened here at our company. It was stunning to me. He got it. He understood that he was actually at the heart of what was going on inside of his organization.
Yeah.
And I checked in with that team a couple of years later, and they told me he was never the same guy after that moment. He had fundamentally changed because he realized for change to really take effect, it had to begin with him. And he was never the same since then. Fear doesn't make bad news going away. Fear makes bad news go into hiding, and when it goes into hiding, it becomes those lumps in the carpet that the organization trips over all the time, and they don't know why. And it just diminishes everything we're doing. It creates chaos. Now we're firefighting mode all the time, and just on and on and on it goes.
You used the analogy in one of the videos I watched. Your goal is to create like an air conditioning or an HVAC system that circulates, I guess, pulls fear out and then pushes fresh air in.
Yep, I talked about it just from a metaphorical standpoint. By analogy, I point to the HVAC system up in our ceiling. I say, look, what does it do? Pumps cold air out, filters out dust, warms the temperature up, pumps warm air back in. I said, imagine your culture works like that. Pump fear out of the room, filter out ambiguity, warm it up to a nice safe temperature, pump safety back in. If we have a place where people feel safe when they're working, they will actually begin to trust one another. If they trust one another enough, they'll begin to collaborate. You get collaboration, teamwork eventually forms, and then I think you get to what every company on the planet wants. You get to creativity, energy, imagination, invention, innovation. It's what everybody needs these days. And quite frankly, in your audience, the technical team members, the CIOs, and the IT areas of the company, there isn't a company today that can operate without its technology, right? Starbucks can't sell coffee without their software. United can't schedule their airplanes without software. We can't drive our cars without software. We can't make a phone call without software, right? I mean, it's just everywhere nowadays. This is the key differentiator in businesses, and it's a place maybe we wish we didn't get to, but it's true. It is where we are as a society, and if our software isn't working well, our company is going to suffer. And it is such a big deal now. And a cultural aspect, what I find, and you probably have seen this yourself, you go to these companies that are like the Forbes 100 best and brightest places to work, or, just pick your favorite best places to work honorees. You go inside that organization, you go find their IT team, it is not the company that's described in those articles. Oh, maybe all the business people and everybody else, but the IT team's working like the Morlocks down under the ground in the time machine. They're working 24/7. Think about healthcare.gov. When that didn't launch, right, when the President of the United States came before the nation on September 28th, said, team says we're on target. It's going to launch on October 1st, and by October 4th, they're scheduling congressional hearings because of all the problems. And the President of the United States has to come before the nation, apologize for bugs and glitches, and then he says, what every CIO knows exactly what this means when I heard it. He said, but don't worry. We have people working 24/7 to get things done. And we know what that means in our industry because we don't work IT in shifts. Those were the same people. And tired programmers make bad software.
Well, it sticks with me, though, that how you're tapping unused talent and resources by flushing out the fear, because I just started taking this course called the Flow Genome Project, and it's basically a deep dive into really finding out how you best can get yourself into flow for peak performance states. So not just for athletics, but how you could, with yourself and how you best can get into flow. And it seems to me, on the one hand, I was reading about how you use space at Menlo, and how do you use Teams? And a part of me was sort of uncomfortable with that. But then...
Yes, there's psychologists with data that proves Menlo doesn't work. It's amazing.
But on the other hand, I could see the real synergy that you can get, and everybody's experienced that. Yeah. So maybe you have a much more deeper understanding now after, but what are your thoughts?
So I've gotten to watch this experiment for 17 years. So while I am no expert in cognitive psychology or flow or anything like that, here's what I think we've achieved. We have team flow. This is like a rowing team. This is, you talk about individual performance and you're running a marathon, you got to get into flow and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's neat. But nowadays, and every one of your listeners know this, is leading a technical effort. Soccer is no longer an individual sport. It's not about individual heroes. It is about assembling teams of human beings to do really complex things. And now what we need more than anything is a team flow. And I think we have achieved that. I know we have achieved that because I get to watch it every single day. And it conflicts with a lot of the standard wisdom that you read about. And I will tell you, when those articles come out, because Fast Company magazine calls our kind of environment, one of their articles was, this is an idea born in the mind of Satan in the deepest caverns of hell. They've got psychologists with data that proves it doesn't work. An article a month comes out that says this is the stupidest idea ever, and everybody sends it to me, and they say, Rich, why does this work for Menlo? It doesn't work anywhere else. This open office environment, people working shoulder to shoulder. We don't have earbuds. It's noisy. It's not library quiet. Everybody believes that you can't do software in that environment, yet they see what we do. And I tell them, I say, it's very simple. We didn't build an open and collaborative office. We built an open and collaborative culture. Our space is a reflection of our culture, not the other way around.
You're not just creating some tool. You've reinvigorated the whole DNA operating system, not something shiny on the edge.
And we gave them permission to collaborate. You got to understand that's really fundamentally important. In the earliest part of my managerial career, when I had a boss one time who said, hey, Rich, when you're leading your team, if you see a couple people chatting in the hallway, just go up and stand there. Look at them and say, how's it going? What you working on? And they'll get back to work. As if two people talking to one another isn't work. Now, I sort of understood his motivation, right? They're probably just chatting about the football game. Get back in your cube, get back to work, put your earbuds in, sit down. Here, what's funny is if we see somebody working alone, we'll go, hey, what you working on? Because here, we all work in pairs all day long. You have to think out loud. So it's a noisy environment. If I literally walked out of the room I'm in a little glass-walled conference room so you wouldn't hear the background noise, you would hear the noise of Menlo. There's a cacophony here all day long, but it's the noise of work.
Yeah, right. That stuck out for me too as I was reading it. It's the noise of work. It's not the noise of someone like water cooler conversation.
It's not chit chatty. It's funny that the thing that'll stop Menlo dead in its tracks. I just did this the other day because I was talking to somebody about it, and I was just giving them a little personal tour, and I said, "Watch this." And we walked into the middle of the room, and I started whispering to them, and the whole team stopped. And they looked there like, what are you guys talking about? And I'm like, see, it's so weird, right? Because whispering says, oh, there's something secret being shared, and we want to know what it is. But when it's a noise of work, when it's a consistent noise, it's not the chit-chatty, what was the football game score last weekend, or what are you doing this weekend, or anything like that, but it's actually a noise of work. It's such a consistent noise that it's reinforcing to the culture.
What if you had to talk about the finances, or what if you had to talk about an HR issue? Like what?
I said, this rabbit hole goes pretty deep.
I want to wrap the interview up because we've been in an hour.
We can do it. I can outlast you. I can assure you. So all of our numbers are posted on a wallboard display for all to see, including the world. So if you came in here a tour, we'll show you our numbers. They're on a wallboard display. Our team practices open book finance. They meet once a week to go over the numbers. I'm almost never there. The team's running the company. They see all the numbers. And so it's completely open and transparent when it comes to financials. We don't have an official accounting department. We have several team members who've taken a deep interest in that, and they cycle through the accounting system. Our CFO, who we've just engaged recently, was kind of like freaking out a little bit. He said, you can't do this. Like, oh, but we're going to. And when we give people their evaluations, which is all coming from the team, I'm CEO, co-founder, 50% owner. I don't decide who gets hired. I don't decide who gets promoted. And I don't decide who gets fired here. The team makes all the decisions. If you want to move up here, you do it in a feedback lunch, and the lunch is held out in the middle of the room. And anybody can join, although the person who's getting the evaluation has a say in who is officially invited, and those people officially invited actually get food. But if you wanted to say something, you just go up and sit down at the table and offer some feedback. But it's happening out in the middle of the room. And again, this gets weird enough, and what I'm about to describe was all done with the permission of the people who are getting feedback, just so it doesn't sound like we're totally crazy here. But when Eric Schreffler had his feedback lunch, Elise Hu from National Public Radio, for All Things Considered, came in and stuck a boom mic in the middle of Eric Schreffler's feedback lunch. Unscripted, unfettered. Now, Eric said it was okay. Corey invited tour guests into his feedback lunch. He came up to me and says, "Hey, Rich, by the way, I'm having feedback lunch today. If anybody on the tour wants to sit in and listen in on how these go, they're welcome to."
You know, we're going to have a round two of this, because like you said, it's a rabbit hole. It's endless. But what's really sticking out for me is the massive amount of courage it takes to be vulnerable and to take these steps, both as a owner-founder, but as the employee in the organization that you transformed prior to doing Menlo. And it's just, it just takes such a big deal. And two things I like to end with is, I listened to you talk and saying people come back with great ideas after listening to you or reading the book, and they come back with tons of ideas that they want to implement. What are the most common negative feedback people are going to give, and then what would you recommend the leader to say as a response?
Yes, so you know how this happens. You go to a conference, you read a book, you get inspired, you go back to work the next day, and you grab the first person you can find. Like, I have this great idea, right? You know, plastic biking helmets to run meetings or something. And that person looks at you and goes, "Oh, that won't work here. That's not us. That's against policy. HR wouldn't allow that," or something like that, right? And the idea dies right in the moment. I mean, we've all experienced that, right? And all I want to say is to arm you with one simple phrase, all of you leaders out there, or even if you're not leaders, if you're just a budding leader, or, you know, you're in an organization, look them in the eye and say, yeah, let's run the experiment. Let's not defeat something before we even try it. Let's try something and see what happens. And if it works, awesome. If it doesn't, well, we'll adjust. But let's run the experiment.
Let's run the experiment.
And I will tell you, that simple phrase has dramatically changed big companies. I mean, the amount of people who come back and say, "Rich, that was the most freeing thing you said," because when you call it an experiment, it's almost declaring, yeah, we're not sure it'll work, but we got to try it. We got to see, right? But if it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. It isn't like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we tried something that didn't work.
Sure.
You just look and say, it was an experiment, right? And we've run some crazy ones, I'm sure you read about in the book.
So for the budding leaders, the tried and true leaders that just want change, people that have reached kind of their crucible moments, where do you recommend people, read and learn about some of these philosophies, and what are the top one or two or three things that they can do is to read, books to read, things to listen to, that would be a good starting point for people?
Well, Joy Inc., of course.
And I want to make a point that I'm going to put on the show notes links to the book, Menlo, to your LinkedIn. Are you active on Twitter?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Menlo Prez.
So I'll put links so people can reach out to you on Twitter as well. Would you prefer Twitter?
Yep.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, it all work. You can put my email address, rsheridan@menloinnovations.com. That works for me, too. All routes to me are A-OK. I'm a nut about email, so if you write me an email, I will respond, typically within 24 hours. I think by the time I was done checking my inbox this morning, there were 5 messages. So I really work hard at that. As a leader, I keep track of my email. But yeah, I mean, if you're really interested, obviously you can come and visit us. 4,000 people a year do. You probably have a sense of why that happens now based on this conversation. But in the back of my book, I call this section Recommended Teachers, and I outline probably 100 books that have greatly influenced our thinking. And they come from all walks. You know, I would certainly recommend books like Patrick Lencioni's books on the 5 dysfunctions of a team and getting naked. I would recommend the books from Vital Smarts on crucial conversations and influencer. the books from Arbinger Institute, Leadership and Self-Deception and the Anatomy of Peace. Any book that Ari Weinzweig at Zingerman, so that I talk about a lot in the book. Ari is an incredibly prolific writer, so any books that he's read will be just filled with wisdom along these lines. But maybe my grandest encouragement to your audience is, if you are not a reader today, become one. Those people, those authors became my teachers in my deepest and darkest days.
That's just, it's just invaluable. And so I really recommend people get the book. I didn't get to the recommendations section, so I'm going to go cycle back to that myself. It's perfect. I think we do become what we read about, and we listen and we consume. So thank you for this. And thank you for your contribution to leadership and into business and giving people hope in today's day and age, especially for our digital transformation leaders that are listening to this.
No question. They need it. I know they do. I know if they're suffering, I know exactly what it feels like, because I was there for over a decade.
Well, I'm super excited that we got a chance to talk, Rich, and I hope we can do a round 2 in the future.
I would be delighted to do that, Bill. Thanks so much for inviting me into your world.
Thank you, sir. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Well, that wraps up my conversation with Rich Sheridan. I hope you enjoyed it. Well, I didn't mention this actually, but I did buy several copies of this book to share with my team. I'm going to be handing it out to different customers I see, and I just think it has a tremendous impact on how we think. I found my thinking just kind of shifting as I talked to Rich. So make sure to check out the show notes page at redzonetech.net/podcasts. Also, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter. As I mentioned, my newsletter can be accessed right on your phone by clicking the subscribe button, or on the web at the show notes page I just mentioned. And there you can access, and I'll get to you all of the content that is outside of this podcast that you may find useful. So until the next episode, I want to wish you the very best, and bye-bye. So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.